Last weekend was week 0 of the college football season, but now, much to the chagrin of this Spartan, we have to count beyond 0 as week 1 gets underway later on this week. Joining us now to preview the Big Ten football season ahead for the University of Michigan, for the Michigan Wolverines, as well as my Michigan State Spartans and beyond as we look into the future of college football, is Michael Spath, special lecturer at the University of Michigan. Michael, thanks for joining us, and of course, go green.
Well, you know what? That makes my wife happy. She's a Spartan, so happy to be here and happy to talk college football. What an exciting time it is of the year to finally get going. I've enjoyed our summers, but there's nothing like football and fall season here in Michigan.
Yeah, that first week or week 0, as it's referred to, watching just college football be back in action, even though some of that action not as great as you'd hope for as the college football season gets underway. Week 1, very exciting all across the board. Lots of great games coming up this week, including some Big Ten teams such as Ohio State opening the season this weekend. But for the University of Michigan, it's also a big time of the year because they're at a point where it's a really interesting situation, particularly at the quarterback position. Jim Harbaugh earlier on this week announced that there still isn't quite a decision there on a definitive starting quarterback. Week 1 versus Colorado State, it will be Cade McNamara. Week 2 versus Hawaii, J.J. McCarthy will get the start, and he's kind of moved that goalpost to week 3, so to speak, in terms of choosing a quarterback. What's your take on this particular situation? Because on one hand, you have a returning quarterback that is an upperclassman, has been there, has won a Big Ten championship as your primary quarterback, but you're also looking to the future and continuing to build this program into hopefully a championship contender for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to digest, and I actually really love them because I tell you what, there's so much speculation this offseason about what Michigan's going to do at the quarterback position. You have a returning Big Ten champion, a guy who beat Ohio State, a guy who helped lead Michigan to win over Iowa and win its first conference title since 2004 in Cade McNamara. How do you bench that guy? But at the same time, you've got this young sophomore, J.J. McCarthy, who, by all accounts is the future of Michigan football, is the one who can put up the big numbers that we see across the college football landscape right now. And so what do? You have both of these quarterbacks, and both of them want to stay at the University of Michigan. And so this decision by Jim Harbaugh to play both quarterbacks, to give each of them a start in the first 2 games, would this be happening if Michigan was playing Notre Dame like Ohio State is this weekend, or if they're playing Oregon like Georgia is? Probably not. He would probably have gone with Cade McNamara, but that's not the situation. He has the luxury of playing 3 of the worst non-conference opponents in college football right now in Colorado State, Hawaii, and Connecticut. And so this is an opportunity for him to give both guys a chance to play, show what they can do, and then we'll get to week 3 and we'll debate who looked better and who should be the starter going forward. But I think it's a win for the fans. I think it's a win for both quarterbacks. I think it's a win for the team. I've heard some people speculate and say, like, well, you need to get your offense, your quarterback in there and get used to it. I mean, come on, guys. Like, this offense is going to roll through these 3 opponents. And so it doesn't make a difference if Cade McNamara gets 80% of the snaps or J.J. McCarthy gets 80% of the snaps. This is going to be easy fodder for them really early on in the year. And it'll be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a great move by Jim Harbaugh. And then, you know what, after 2 weeks, we'll have a whole nother debate about who should be the starter going forward.
Yeah, you have these 3 weeks that are kind of throwaway games, as you mentioned, and you don't want to ever treat a game like a throwaway because that's how it becomes a trap game. But we're going up against arguably the worst non-conference schedule in all of college football, and definitely so in the Big Ten, going up against Colorado State, Hawaii, and Connecticut. You have some time to make that decision. But from my perspective, my thought for the University of Michigan is they have to decide on what is this team this year. Are they a championship level team this year, Big Ten championship, potentially national championship contender this year? And if that's the case, I stick with the guy that's been Mr. Consistency, that has got you there before, and go with Cade McNamara. But if you're looking toward the future, if you still think you're a couple of years away from really being able to contend with the best of the best, particularly from the SEC, teams like Georgia and teams like Alabama, then maybe you go with a guy that's got a little bit of youth and has some development left, but has that high potential in J.J. McCarthy. For you, from your perspective, especially as a Michigan guy, which way would you prefer? Are you a Cade guy? Are you a J.J. guy? And where's your decision in terms of whether they go for it all now, or if they should be developing for it all down the road?
Well, I mean, the crazy thing about college football is this idea of developing for down the road. I mean, they don't necessarily have to. There's nothing that says that JJ McCarthy can't be everything that they need him to be in 2022 and compete with Ohio State for the Big Ten title and go and play in the college football playoff again. I look at it like this. I mean, if you had a normal non-conference schedule, and I did some history, some research the other day. This is the first time since the 1960s that Michigan will have a non-conference without a Power Five opponent on it. So we're talking, 60 years where they've had at least one Power Five, labeled by today's standards on their non-conference schedule. So I look at this is the perfect opportunity for someone like JJ McCarthy to play against Colorado State, Hawaii, Connecticut, and then to play against Maryland. Those are 4 easy games to start the year before they go on the road to play Iowa. If it was up to me, I would probably go with the young guy. And here's the thing, if the young guy were to struggle in the first couple of weeks, you could say, you know what, we've got this proven Big Ten championship quarterback in Cade McNamara, and now I will go with Cade McNamara. The flip side is if Cade McNamara struggles, but I don't think he will. I mean, Cade McNamara is consistent. So, yeah, I would go with JJ McCarthy the first 4 games and see what he does. But they're going with this approach, and we're all going to have a lot of fun being the armchair quarterbacks that we are and breaking it down and saying who should get what in the next couple of weeks. So it's fun, man. I mean, this is what we all live for. And either way, they're going to be a good football team this year. Either way, they're going to be a team that can win 9, 10, potentially 11 games during the regular season and have a chance to beat Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State. Will they? We don't know yet, but they'll have that chance as the season unfolds.
Yeah, certainly this year for the University of Michigan, as you've already mentioned and touched on, that offense is going to be there. It's a lot of returning players, especially in those skill positions. I mean, the loss of Hassan Haskins is going to have some sort of an impact, but you got Donovan Edwards back there. You're returning Blake Corum. And in the receiving core, you're already strong and returning Ronnie Bell after injury this year. So that offense is going to be pretty powerful. The defense is where you lose some of those key guys, Hayden Hutchinson, David Ajabo, and so on. That's really where there's some point of maybe a little bit of concern, but even then, not a whole lot of concern, I wouldn't think. What's your take on the defensive losses for Michigan and the impact that could have on them, particularly in some of those big games in the Big Ten that you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because they should be better in the secondary than they were a year ago, even with the loss of Dax Hill, who was a first-round draft pick. And they might be as good at linebacker, but you don't lose 2 guys like Hutchinson or Jabo combined for 27 sacks. You don't lose those 2 guys and just think that you're going to pick up right where you left off. I mean, the nice thing again is the fact that they have 4 cupcakes to open up the season, so it gives an opportunity to a lot of defensive ends and rush players to develop some confidence and develop some some production, and that's exciting. But yeah, I mean, you look at it like they were a really good defense a year ago. They bottled up C.J. Stroud at Ohio State, and that was one of the big reasons why they were to beat the Buckeyes. They struggled against Kenneth Walker from Michigan State, and that's why they lost that game. They looked good against Sean Clifford in Penn State and won that game. I mean, when the defense played well, as good as the offense was and as good as the offense can be this year, when the defense played well is how they won 11 games during the regular season and won the Big Ten championship. So again, they open up with a fairly easy non-conference, so they should have an opportunity to build that confidence. But I'm curious. I'm really curious. I mean, I've heard so many names speculated about who's going to replace Hutchinson and Ajabo, but until we see that in live game action, it's just hypothetical right now. But it should be fun to see who are those guys: Jalen Harrell, Chris Jenkins, Rayshawn Benny, some of the ones that I've heard. Taylor Upshaw. I mean, these are not household names. Nobody's household names. But David Ajabo wasn't a household name a year ago, and now he is. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. And let's just get it rolling here. And the nice thing is Michigan State plays on Friday, so we don't have to wait that much longer to watch our teams play.
And just northwest of Ann Arbor, in East Lansing, Michigan State Spartans. A lot of expectations for that team as well coming back this year. And you think about that defense last year, absolutely atrocious, arguably the worst in the Big Ten, one of the worst in the entire NCAA, especially in the secondary. As expected, Mel Tucker goes into the transfer portal, plug some of those holes. Guys like Chris Bogle coming in from Florida, Jacoby Windeman coming in. from UNLV at the linebacker position, Aaron Brule, another guy there. And then particularly in the secondary, getting Amir Speed from Georgia, certainly going to have some sort of an impact. How much of a factor is the defensive woes in Michigan State's ability to be competitive against some of the other top contenders in the Big Ten this year in the University of Michigan, Ohio State, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, they lost 2 games last year against Purdue and Ohio State, and both times they lost, they got crushed by the passing game. Aiden O'Connell at Purdue threw for 550 yards. And then CJ Stroud went out there and I think he had 5 passing touchdowns in the first half against Michigan State. And so, that is the whole key for the Spartans is, are they better in the secondary than they were a year ago? They have some intriguing players up front. They've got a really good linebacker in Cal Halliday coming back, who was a leader for that group a year ago. But are they going to be, they were giving up 340 yards in the passing game last year. That's unheard of. To be giving up that many yards, even in today's college football where they throw a lot more than they used to give up more than 300 yards per game is something I hadn't seen in the Big Ten in a long time. So, yeah, look, if they, they're talking about winning 9 or 10 games or competing with Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State for a conference championship. And if they're going to do it, they cannot be the defensive sieve that they were in the secondary a year ago. And so you mentioned some of the transfers they brought in. Obviously, it's been a point of emphasis all off season. And if they get better in that spot, then there's no reason with what they have at the quarterback spot, what they have at wide receiver. And then, I think we'll probably talk about it, but how does the running game develop in the absence of Kenneth Walker? But if they can answer some of those questions, there's no reason that they can't win 9, 10, 11 games in the Big Ten regular season.
Yeah, Jarek Broussard coming in from Colorado and Jalen Berger coming in from Wisconsin to replace Kenneth Walker III in the backfield for the Michigan State Spartans. That kind of production from Kenneth Walker III, which for a lot of people was a surprise, a big factor in Michigan State's ability to stay in a lot of those games when their defense was certainly lacking. That's definitely going to be a factor as they try to answer that 11-2 season and compete with the University of Michigan and with Ohio State, who they see early on in the season in East Lansing. In terms of Ohio State, give us an outlook on what you believe is going to be the case for the Buckeyes this season, coming in after a strong year in the Big Ten, losing, of course, in the Big Ten championship. Not in the Big Ten championship at the end of the season to the University of Michigan, sending U of M to the Big Ten championship game where they eventually won. What do you think about the Buckeyes in 2022?
Yeah, on paper, they look amazing, right? CJ Stroud was third in the Heisman ballot last year, lost to Bryce Young and Abe Hutchinson, but he's back and he's got incredible weapons. They lost 2 wide receivers, but they probably have the best wide receiver in the country coming back. They have a top running back in Trayvon Henderson, who's going to be a sophomore. This is a team like Alabama, like Georgia, and fairly consistently like Clemson. That seems to not just reload every year, but somehow almost gets more talented every year. They had a lot of defensive problems. Michigan ran the football right down their throat in the final game of the regular season, and that's why Michigan beat Ohio State. So they've spent a lot of time in the offseason. They brought in a new defensive coordinator from Oklahoma State. Their goal is to be one of the top 20 defenses in college football. And if they can combine that with what is a scary, scary offense, then we should see them roll through the Big Ten or most of the Big Ten like we consistently have seen the last couple of years. They have a massive matchup with Notre Dame on Saturday night. Marcus Freeman, a former Ohio State linebacker, is now coaching at Notre Dame. And so we're going to get a good look at both the Irish and the Buckeyes in this first week. But I would be stunned if Ohio State is not going into the Michigan game, at least a 10-1 football team and potentially an 11-0 football team, just like they have been. And so that's, the task is for Michigan State and for Michigan and for Penn State. One of those 3 teams, are you good enough this year to beat Ohio State? If you do, chances are you're playing for the Big Ten championship. If you don't, well, then we're going to see more of the same, which is Ohio State into Indianapolis this year.
Yeah, as much as it pains me to say, I believe that the Big Ten championship certainly runs through Columbus and Ann Arbor this year. Once again, if you can beat either or ideally both of them, you have a very solid chance at competing for the Big Ten championship and probably winning that. We're joined by Michael Spath, special lecturer at the University of Michigan, on the Megacast today. Before I let you go, I want to give you a moment to give us your take on the future of college football, particularly the Big Ten, where it looks like the future of college football is going to be two super conferences, the Big Ten, whatever that becomes, and the SEC, whatever that becomes, with the Big Ten already adding or set to add USC and UCLA next year. What do you think that the Big Ten needs going forward to really be that competitive secondary or even primary super conference as opposed to the SEC? What do they really need to get over that hump and be that king of the hill conference, especially in the era of super conferences?
Well, they're well on their way by adding USC and UCLA. I mean, with USC and Ohio State, you have two of the premier programs in college football that can both recruit at an elite level and have shown in the last 20 years that they can compete with Alabama and Georgia and the best, the SEC. You know, the question is can Michigan State, can Penn State, can UCLA, those are the programs that have the ability to recruit at a high level. Can they consistently recruit at that level to join the USC and Ohio State consistency? We're going to see. You know, what they need, what the Big Ten needs to take one more step.
Appears we're having some issues with Michael there, just a little phrase up there. I'll continue on. I'll give you what my take is. I think they need to continue with some of those power teams
One of the
in
schools.
the top 25. Michael's back. Go ahead. Continue on, Michael.
Oh, sorry. I would, you know, if I was the Big Ten, what I would be doing is I would be going after Oregon and Washington. I'd be going after Notre Dame. And I would look at the South and say, who can we poach from the South? And the teams that we've heard is Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and even Florida State. Florida State is a pretty good academic school. I think they rank in the top 60 according to the U.S. News World Rankings. Like, that fits the Big Ten model. And if the Big Ten can go get a Florida school and open up that recruiting territory and that TV market, and go get, say, Georgia Tech, which Georgia Tech is a bad football program, but open up the Georgia recruiting territory, and then you add Oregon and Washington or maybe Notre Dame, I think they'll have a chance to be the biggest super conference. Obviously, the SEC is adding Oklahoma and Texas. We don't know what they're going to do after that. I think they probably want Miami and Clemson. But you know, it's both fun and aggravating because the Big Ten, because college football is shifting so dramatically right now. And for most of us who have grown up in an era of the 80s, the 90s, even the 2000s, or if you go back further, the 70s, college football was always geographically centered. So it was the teams that were close to you, that's who you play. And now it's stretching from, you know, New York City, or I guess, you know, Piscataway, New Jersey, where Rutgers is, to Southern California, potentially down to Tallahassee and up to Seattle. So it's really stretching across the country. It's no longer about geography. It's just about as many big brands as you can get, as much money as you can get. That's what's driving college football, and really has for the last 20 years.
Yeah, that forward thinking simply just not there at the NCAA level. And when you stick so vehemently to tradition, when tradition breaks, it breaks quickly and it breaks fast and has a large impact. Michael, appreciate you joining us today talking about this year's Big Ten football schedule and all the other great stories across college football.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it. Sorry about the Wi-Fi. We all got our power knocked out by a storm yesterday, so we're just hanging on here as best we can.